Hey, this is Mr. Sorensen, and I'm here at Royal Woodshop, and I'm here to introduce to you your last project. So we've done a lot of woodworking in a short period of time, building the bridge and the model house. Now it's time to look at another aspect of woodworking, which is design. So you have a third kit, and let me just show you some of the things you're going to find in it. Number one is your design page. This is where you're going to create your design that you're going to attempt to build. You should also have a little backing piece, right? This is called press board, and it's where you're going to design and glue your project. You'll have a bunch of pieces of material wrapped up like that. There's about 5 or 6 different hardwoods in here, a variety of colors that you're going to design with. And then from your other project, you're going to need your miter box, your saw, and you're going to need the glue. And you may end up needing the tape measure or the ruler, because you're going to have to cut and design and mark and make pieces that fit together much like a puzzle. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to make a piece of wall art, and I would recommend highly that you pause this and go look on Pinterest, or you can even look on Google for wooden wall art, and then look at the images, and you'll get an idea of the vast variety of kinds of ideas people create out of wood to hang kind of like a picture on their wall in their home. So your first job is going to be to design something. The picture that you create is going to be the size of one of these, right? So in your bag, you received one of these shapes, either the rectangle or the square. I don't know what one you picked up, but there was a variety of them. So you're going to pick that up, look at which one you're using, and that's where you want to design your project. I would do it light with a pencil at first, because you might want to change it, right? Go look, do some research, and then be creative and come up with an idea that you could create on your piece of paper, your design element. Now, the one thing that you're limited by here is you have a certain number of pieces of wood that are a certain color, and you're also limited by the miter box and the saw. You get 3 different cuts that you can use to create this wall art. You get a 90-degree cut, so your pieces can come in and meet at 90 degrees. You have 45. 45 would allow me to put a picture frame all the way around the outside edge of my piece of wood. And then I have this 24-degree angle in here that I could make some pieces that have an angle there. Whatever angle I cut, I have to come up with a piece on the other side of it that has a complementary angle, so that this whole thing fits together into this one rectangle. Okay? So those are your limitations. You're limited by that saw and that miter box. You're limited by the size. And then finally, you're limited by the number of sticks and the color they are. Outside of that, what you want to do is, as you look on Pinterest, you'll see there's no end to the creativity, right? You can come up with all sorts of stuff. So you want to start the project by designing your idea. Now, to start with, I'm just going to look at my computer for a little bit. I'm going to type in wooden wall art. Wooden wall art. And I can do that on Google. I could go into Pinterest. Pinterest is another great place to find wooden wall art. Let me show you what I would find. If I type in wooden wall art, then the photographs that come up look like this, right? This is wooden wall art. And this is what you're going to make in your project. So some really cool stuff in here. There's one I really like. Here's another really neat one right here. Here's one with just kind of squares that are cut. I could cut squares and make just kind of a giant checkerboard kind of an appearance. So here are some squares. Here's one where I just have different lengths. Some are more random. Right, this one has a pattern. Patterns are good, right? There's an interesting one right there that could be done. And so I'm just going to scroll for a few minutes through these wooden wall art pictures to get some ideas. There's one that could definitely be done for our project. Tools to do that in our kit. So while I like what they did there, I don't think we could do that one. This one here we could do. That's a really interesting looking one. This one here, you could do that. That's a great example of something we could do in our kit. So you get the idea. Your first job is to browse through either Google or Pinterest. A good place to go is Pinterest, and look up type in the wooden wall art and just browse through it, right? Just browse through all the different pictures that you see, right? Great one right there. Great one right. These are all things that we could do. Great one right there. Great one right there. We could do something kind of like that. Right? There's one. Really cool. So that's step one for our project. The next thing I'm going to do is, now that I have my idea, is I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to take my drawing paper, my design sheet out of my bag, and I'm going to start drawing lines on my paper, right? Whatever my project idea I've come up with, I'm going to start drawing that on my paper. Another good tool to use for this is the ruler that you were given in your first project. And I probably want to do this. I probably want to take my pieces out of my bag and measure them so I know what size I should be drawing these lines on my board. So this is about 9/16. So when I draw these lines, I just want to make sure they're 9/16 apart. And I'm slowly going to start drawing my idea out on the sheet of paper. Well, I have my pattern drawn, and I've actually gone in and I've written in the colors of the wood. So I've looked at the different colors in my packet. I've written in the colors of the wood that I want in each of the different spots. I'm really just attempting here in this one to make more of a pattern. But I could do, like we saw in that in those Pinterest pictures, there's just unlimited different kind of shapes, and you could try to make a circle, you could try to make a hexagon. There's no end to the different shapes and patterns that could be made. So I've gone in, I've made my pattern, I have written in the different colors and where I want them, and I'm ready now to kind of transition from the drawing phase into the building phase. Here's the drawing that I'm going to be doing in my project. You kind of get the pattern shape that's on there, right? And I'm going to be using colors and lines to make a cool looking pattern on my wall art project. As in my other projects, I'm going to go ahead and just put that template that I've made now into my plastic bag, so as I work on it, if I get glue on it, I am not going to mess it up. And like our other projects, I'm going to work right off of my pattern, my template. So I've chosen to do the rectangle shape. I'm going to lay my pieces right on the shape, right on my template, and I'm going to mark them with my pencil, and I'll go ahead and begin to cut them. Now, just like with our other project, it's important that the pieces are the right length. So part of your grade on this project is really going to come from accuracy and neatness. This is an art piece, a wall art piece. So We want to move away from pieces kind of scattered and glued and like, well, whatever, it's close enough. This is a piece of art. So now we want these pieces to fit tightly, neatly, uniformly together. So when I get the piece done, I want to make sure it's exactly the right size. So how do I make sure my pieces are exactly the right size so they fit neatly and I get the highest grade possible? Well, once again, we want to fall back on our trusty sanding block that we made, right? So this sanding block I started with in the first kit. It came with my first kit, and I can use it in all the kits, right? We used it in the first kit to work on pieces, make pieces smooth, make pieces shorter. We used it in the house to do the same thing, and once again, I'm gonna rely on that. So if my piece seems to be a little long, then I take it and sand it carefully, right? Carefully. I don't want to round the end of this over. I want to try to make it as nice and square as I can. What I might do is take my miter box. The miter box, like we saw in the house, can work as a tri-square. So I could put my miter box up against it like that, draw a line across, and that shows me if is the end square or is it not. And if I see, oh, it's a little longer at this side, then I can use that to sand it and kind of guide my sanding until it looks like it's really straight. I'll go ahead and continue that process. I'm going to go ahead and take the next piece. I want to see that they sit next to each other very well. They fit great. And I'm going to take my next piece, again, lay it on my template, and mark it at the right length. Throw it in my miter box. Make sure I cut it the right length. And just continue on this way. All right, first one down. I'm now going to move to a different color. And I'll repeat those steps. Mark it right on the drawing. Throw it in my miter box, make my cut. And I'll just continue this way until I've got all the pieces and all the shapes and all the parts cut. All right, well, there's my last piece. I've now cut out all the pieces to make up my wall art, and they're all arranged now in the right colors and the right pattern on my template. My next step is going to be to start to assemble these. So let me just show you close up what it looks like here with all the pieces cut out. All right, so there's the wall art with the pattern and all the pieces cut and ready to glue together. So now my next step is going to be to start assembling these and gluing them. So let me show you what that's going to look like. All right, so to start this out, I'm going to turn over the parts, the pieces of hardwood that have burns on them. You could get rid of it with sanding, but it's pretty hard. Now, this piece right here, if you look at it up close, you'll notice that it has a burn mark on it. This dark line right here, that's a burn mark. You could do one of two things, sand it off or turn the piece over. That's gonna be your best bet. So turning it over is the easiest way to go. I'm also gonna grab my spring clamps from my bridge project. I'm gonna use those here. And with my sanding block handy, I'm going to use that to really clean up the edges and splintering on my pieces, right? Once I get this together, I want it to look really nice, and then I'll come back and do some sanding, but once the ends are glued in, it's going to be hard to get in there with the sandpaper. So I'm going to do this all first before I glue it on. All right, so I'm going to start by putting at least 2 pieces. It could be more if I had some more clamps, but I'm going to put those first 2 pieces on there. I want to make sure they're at a right angle, so I'm going to use something, right? I could use this, my miter box, if it appears to have a nice square corner. I want to make sure that these 2 pieces are glued tightly together and at a right angle. And then I'm going to put my clamps on it. So that as I move on from this one, right? Now I'm going to start adding pieces to that. The clamps are going to hold this piece in place and keep it from sliding. And so that's going to let me build from that. And these 2 pieces are going to stay right where they are at a right angle. So I really want to go to some length here to try to make sure that these are correct. So I'm going to use this corner right here, which is nice and square and sharp. I'm going to stick it in there and make sure everything looks nice and square. Push it together, make sure the clamps are holding it. And now from here, I'll start to add the remaining pieces following my pattern that I have laid out here. I'll start to add the remaining pieces to my puzzle, which is sort of what it's like. This is a lot like a puzzle. So in the cutting up and in the gluing together, it would be very easy to get lost if I'm not careful. So I'm going to do a bit of sanding ahead of time. And now as I put this together, I would expect that I'm probably going to end up having to do some sanding and correcting, right? Because everything I cut initially was loose. So as I put these together tight, I may find that I have to cut or at least sand some of these pieces down a little bit. So the next piece that comes in here is the brown. Again, I'm going to sand it. Apply a little bit of glue to the back. All right, so I now have my first 2 layers on. The first layer again has the clamps, so as I push up against it, they're not going to slide. And now I'm starting to add my second. And now I'm going to come into my purple layer, add my 3rd layer, and I'll just keep building up layer after layer after layer till I get down to the very end. So I'll go ahead and do that I'll come back and join you again in a second when I'm done. I have my piece of wall art just about completed. So I've let the glue dry. It's the next day. The glue is now thoroughly dried, so I can take off my clamps. And there's my final product. Now what needs to happen is I need to sand it. So I'm just going to work for a while on sanding both the front surface. As we learned about, this is hardwood, and hardwood is much harder. These particular hardwoods that you're working with are far harder than the wood that you worked with on your house. So in order to get all these things flat, it's going to take a lot of arm power. If you have power tools at home, right, and your parents allow you to use them, that certainly could make quick work from this. My grandfather built houses with hand tools. The house that my dad grew up in was built just like your house, except it was all done with no power, which takes an incredible amount of talent and skill and determination, right? It's much harder to do that, just like it's much harder for me to sand this flat with a hand sanding block as opposed to a power sander. But it certainly is much more like this, the woodworkers, the craftsmen of the past who did all of this same kind of work, right? We've seen, like, in the last couple of years, we saw the Cathedral of Notre Dame had a big giant fire. And if you saw any of that, right, you saw unbelievable woodworking, all done by hand tools, right? And many of those hand tools far more crude than the hand tools that we use today. And yet that entire cathedral, enormous cathedral, was all done by hand. That about wraps it up. I could put some finish on it. Now, you may, or I didn't send any finish with you in your kit, but one way you could put finish on this would be to use some oil out of the kitchen, right? So whatever kind of oil you might have in your kitchen, corn oil, olive oil. Olive oil is probably a good one. You could put that on here. You put it on and massage it around with your hands, get it all over everything, let it dry for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then take a rag and wipe it all off. And you could just build that up over a small amount of time. And that puts a finish on it. You'll notice it brings out a lot of the color in your project. So here's my final piece of wall art. It would look great sitting on my dresser or maybe on a shelf in the living room. I could also probably put something across the back here if I wanted to hang it on the wall, which could be done. It's just a very small version of the much larger versions that we saw on Pinterest. But this idea, this concept really is meant to hang on the wall. So you could do that with this little version. But I hope you enjoyed the creativity of this project. This project was more designed for you to design and be creative, so that you got to experience that as well as the actual building of it. Excellent work this semester. Good job on building your projects, and we'll see you next time here in the woodshop at Royal High School.